Hello, friends. Bucket list item achieved. Doors of Perception is now available on Amazon Prime to rent or purchase. Look, we know times are tough, but you can rent the SD version for only $1.99, HD for $2.99, or you can buy it for $9.99. Please go check that out. The film is incredible. If you enjoyed Occult Louisiana, wait until you see this one. Be sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review on Amazon, and enjoy this episode.
I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts, you have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Austin Wade Picard. Be sure to watch Doors of Perception, available now on Amazon Prime. We are booking guests for June and July. If you have a suggestion or you'd like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Be sure to visit our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. It's the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. We feature some of your favorite podcasts and content creators. And if you listen to Forbidden Knowledge News on any podcast platform, please do so on Spreaker. That is always free for you. Today I want to welcome Austin Wade Picard. He is an independent researcher and host of the Underclass podcast. Austin, welcome. How you doing?
All is well, brother. It's nice to officially get to sit down with you and have a conversation, honestly, and get to meet you as well, because I've at least seen your work from afar for quite some time, so I'm very much aware of you and appreciate what you do, and the line of interest that you are kind of in is very much the similar path that I'm following, as far as just, seemingly finding ourselves within the framework of this oversaturated landscape of psychological warfare and mind control techniques. It seemed to just entirely disrupt, I think by design, obviously, but entirely disrupt this sort of the cultural framework as it is intended to deceive, I think, each individual on as far as the average person. We're intended to fall into the trap, and it's a preordained outcome in many ways. And I think that it's up to at the very least, the people like us who are willing to reject the current power paradigm and dig a little further below the surface. What inevitably results is we catch a glimpse of this, right? This international kind of. It's an octopus, right? The octopus of global control, maybe as far as Charlie Robinson put it in those terms. I love that book, but yeah, I think it's a great way to describe, the tentacles just reaching out internationally all over the world, disrupting global society, in every facet.
100%, man, and that's really a great intro to what we're going to talk about. The longer you spend trying to understand the mechanics of culture creation and the layers of influence, psychological operations, and the all-encompassing web of control, like you were just saying, through three-letter agencies, secret societies, organized crime, politics, and at times all the way down to your local officials, sheriff's office, education board. So the tentacles go deep, and today we're going to learn more about these clandestine groups and operations. And like I was telling you earlier, you've done some amazing work uncovering history and some of the groups involved. But before we get into that, this is your first time on. Tell us just a little bit more about yourself, what got you involved with this, and let the audience know where they can find you.
Man, thank you. Yeah, basically, I felt First of all, my name's Austin Picard, and I started the Underclass podcast in April of 2023. So very much still in its infancy, in my mind, but I felt as if one, I was kind of in this position where I felt entirely isolated and alone with my ideas, and that was kind of a lifestyle I could no longer. I wanted to surround myself more with people who are practicing their real ethical principles, and that they've outlined personally and understand and have defined, and are pursuing something passionate and worthwhile, and also that very obvious common thread in terms of feeling entirely unrepresented and demoralized and you know disenfranchised, right, by the just the system as it is currently structured, and that in itself, with the kind of the two-party delusion playing out and manipulating the minds of the average person who falls into the tribalist collectivist mentality, which seems to me to be this very much a poison pill. um that's what drove me to start the underclass, was that I was witnessing kind of like the destruction and destabilization of my own family, and seeing the infiltration of the family dynamic and the disruption of that very dynamic by design as well. And yeah, I couldn't stomach just remaining silent and also not pursuing the path that I was already on. I just was essentially pacing around in the front room, vomiting all this information at my wife. And she's like, do something with this, right?
Yeah.
Which she's not wrong. And I love her for that. But yeah, anyway, so that's effectively how I kind of started the show. And I'm originally from Northwest Arkansas, right? Grew up in a very small rural community. And um and I very much appreciate that foundation, in many ways now, than and much more than I did as a child, obviously.
Mm.
But I can. It's kind of interesting how you're a prisoner of your own experience and you reject what you know, and so many of us kind of fall into that path. And I wanted to experience the big city. I wanted to experience the exact opposite of what I knew, and little did I know, right? There are let's say there are good things and bad things about every different lifestyle, and sort of let's say I very much desire to move back to the small rural community, though. That is what I will say, right? Because I'm out in Los Angeles at this point, and there are upsides, and I appreciate some of them, but at the end of the day, it's like it's not a place I want to raise my children. It's not at all a it's spiritually hollow. There's and also it's very. I mean, there's a lot more threats that are, at least in my mind, there are many more threats to face in this environment than if I had a more controlled environment. Obviously. And then other than that, property rights, I just very much appreciate the concept and want to, uphold and embrace that lifestyle as well. Because again, it's like, man, growing up on a 35-acre farm and moving to a big city sucks, right? Like I never in my life, after we move again, my number one goal is not to have neighbors
Hmm.
that are within visual distance. You know what I mean?
Right on. Yeah.
But anyway, so that's kind of how I got here. But I think philosophically, I also witnessed kind of like, you know, um, I definitely saw this kind of like hijacking of an ideological subversion playing out as well in many different ways, not just political ideology, but spiritual terms, where you're talking like infiltrating organized religion and leveraging it and exploiting it in many ways by misinterpretations and manufactured false prophecies. I think falling within,
Yeah.
right, the current structured paradigm of the state, how they utilize that to their benefit. Like I was discovering all of that, and I really just I couldn't even. It obviously at the beginning, you like most people, all you want to do is wake up the next person and save everyone. And it's like, it's an impossible task, and you'll just lose your damn mind. And beyond that, you're going to ruin many different relationships because you're forcing the issue, and I kind of like experience that as well. As much as people need to hear it, it's also like, I'm realizing that people they have to basically be introduced to these ideas on their own terms, and otherwise they won't be as willing to embrace or accept this, or even consider and conceptualize it.
Mm.
And they'll usually blame you for forcing them to question their paradigm, right? And that's typically what takes place. And I experienced that as well. And I just thought, at a certain point, right, when you become comfortable enough in the information that you've accumulated over time, you realize that that's not the role to play. This weird God complex, and you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And in reality, it really just matters, I think, to try and live your life by those principles, and hopefully, by example, you might influence others along that path. But you know, until they're receptive and willing, those conversations aren't very much worth having, and that's another thing I realized. So I'm trying
Yeah.
to find people to have worthwhile conversations with. Like, that's what it ultimately resulted in. And here we are, buddy. You
That's
know what I
it,
mean?
man. Very similar journey to mine and many others in this space as well. You can't really open anyone's eyes unless they are willing and ready to see some of these things for themselves. That's why we do what we do. We put it out there, and it's for those that are ready to receive and hear the information. But once you start to hear it, there's no going back. Once you start to see how the sausage is made, you can't go back to just eating it mindlessly and being happy about what you're putting in your mouth. But when we look at the situation we're in right now, there's obviously been many stepping stones along the way. There's been high impact events, psychological operations, wars, and we can look back to World War II and the era that followed that and see this major degradation in morality and extreme changes in humanity as far as spirituality, morality, politics. The entire direction that we were headed seems to have been shifted at a very rapid pace by these very powerful operations. Is that the time period that you'd really look at to focus on, where we can say this is where this major change started to occur and this infiltration started to make itself known?
Yeah, I definitely think that really Operation Gladio and the strategy of tension post World War II was a huge prominent factor in kind of helping with the facilitation of this international intelligence apparatus that I think is really what has staged this, like, this in many ways it's really created and implemented an infrastructure, a clandestine infrastructure that is global in scope, and seemingly it is what consists of what we would consider today as the deep state, in my mind. And I think that when you see how the CIA was founded, and the time frame of it all, and reading like Paul Williams' book, The Unholy Alliance, right, where the Vatican, the CIA, and the mob essentially intersect, and it's basically even can. I mean, it almost looked as if I've also heard it put in these terms as well, as far as Gladio. Really, the CIA was formed to facilitate, and really their ultimate priority was to facilitate the Gladio network and the Nazi rat lines as well, which is a huge factor involved in that, right?
Maybe we
And I
should break
think, like,
down what Gladio is, because I'm sure my audience is familiar with it. A lot of people just think network of global assassins, but it's really much more than that. Tell us a little bit more in depth about what Gladio at first was meant to be and what it is now.
right. Yeah. Well, really, Operation Gladio was effectively like a strategy of tension, as I mentioned, right? Which was very much like the main point being they wanted to create these stay behind networks, essentially, right? Which would then ultimately the stay behind networks would be utilized and exploited and leveraged to then create this environment of destabilization within the context of these various let's say they had Italian gladio, French gladio. The term itself comes from an Italian, I believe it's an Italian sword, is what gladio's reference was actually referencing in the first place. But yeah, it was all in terms of providing a clandestine intelligence tool that could be utilized to create this strategy of tension. And also what would happen is in many ways we're talking psychological warfare. At first the entire justification for this was the Soviet threat, right?
Mm.
And so we had to essentially defend and protect ourselves from the impending imminent Soviet threat. And so all over the world we had to leave these stay behind networks post World War II to maintain a foothold and of some sort of hegemony dominance in the area, and again also utilize this clandestine structure to topple governments, regime change operations, right? And not even only regime change operations, but mass shootings, bombings, and that's all a part of the destabilization environment. And so I think that when you realize that it's all of these NATO member countries, right, that are entirely involved with the Gladio network, I think that it starts to make a lot more sense, especially considering it's very well and overrepresented in many of the countries that, as far as witnessing the rat lines and where you see these Nazi safe havens kind of take just kind of form and entrench themselves, like a Colonia Dignidad in Chile, right, which was very much utilized, which that's a Nazi SS member, Paul Schaefer, who's a legitimate pedophile, ran out of into and then he just props up in Colonia Dignidad and creates this safe haven with razor wire fence perimeter and tunnel systems, and apparently they had files on the JFK assassination, and yeah, they were I guess they had a airstrip, right, where Mengele apparently even stayed in Colonia Dignidad
Yeah.
for a time, Joseph Mengele.
Yeah.
And it's a crazy story because Paul Schaefer had all these young boys around him that he was clearly sexually abusing, but he was also performing these sophisticated mind control techniques on the children as well. And then they had this very strange dynamic in the group where all of them were only allowed to speak German. You can still look at this. There's still a town, or I mean, there's still a footprint of Colonia Dignidad in Chile. They just changed the name of it, and I'm trying to remember now what the hell the name is now, but it's um shit. I'll pull it up in a second. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The main point being is that obviously you had this weird safe haven in the middle of South America, where you have essentially a, a Nazi German community that what was described as was that all of the architecture was essentially from like 1940s Germany. They would wear the exact same clothing and garb as 1940s Germany, and it was like a time warp. They said going into Colonia Dignidad was like going back in time
Huh.
into the Nazi Reich, and
Wow.
so that all just like blew me away. And also, they Colonia Dignidad, what apparently a lot of, so whenever Pinochet and the regime change operation happened with the CIA, they were utilizing Colonia Dignidad for torture techniques on all of these right, these military men who were effectively on the wrong side, and so they would essentially be tortured and murdered at Colonia Dignidad, and there were like mass graves, and all of these militants would be taken out and just shot and assassinated, executed. And so it was very much being utilized as a clandestine black site, uh, although it was an active safe haven for Nazis who had fled post World War II. And so, the fact that the angel of death, right, Mengele himself was supposed to have lived there for a time and flown in and out, and that was another way that apparently they were able to traffic weapons and drugs and all of this, which is why they were apparently they were manufacturing weapons, like sophisticated weaponry at Colonia as well. And that's why they had this private airstrip, because they could fly out all these weapons and smuggle things in and out of the country, unbeknownst to right, the federal authorities. Or so it's very interesting when you consider the fact that clearly, and by the way, you see the rat lines crop up in the safe haven in Montreal as well, in Canada, where the Oak Ridge Montreal experiments are happening, and you have the Oak Ridge facility and the psychopath machine, right? With where Steve Smith was a victim, who's just like this like hippie kid who's trying to trek across Canada to and has like a tab of LSD in his pocket, and he breaks into a car because it's freezing cold at night, and he's like, shit, man, I gotta like sleep and like not die, right? Like that's his ultimate goal at this moment. And he
Yeah.
breaks into a car, and then all of a sudden he wakes up to the cops, right, who are like, hey, get out of this car, you're obviously in trouble. And he gets popped for Grand Theft Auto, even though he never even moved the vehicle. But instead of wanting to be charged with an additional, right, which obviously being charged with LSD at that time, and still it's a
Yeah.
very heavy consequence. And so he just dropped the tab and said he never had done LSD before. And so he was trying to save the tab for him and his buddy when they were gonna see the beach,
Yeah.
apparently. And yeah, and then he drops this tab, he's in custody,
Ooh.
and he starts tripping. And yeah, and so they think he's out of his damn mind, obviously, and utilize this moment to send him to an institution
Oh,
for the criminally
wow.
insane, where he's then put surrounded by these sociopaths, serial killers, child rapists, like Matthew Charles Lamb is a great example. Peter Woodcock is another one, and these guys have incredible stories. Being sent out on a kibbutz, showing up in Rhodesia on the front lines. Yeah,
What?
and it's like they're sociopathic serial killers who were from the Oak Ridge Institution but lived on Dr. Barker was the main guy who ran the facility, and he had a ranch where some of these sociopathic killers would live on his ranch with him. And apparently yeah, that so the fact of the matter is, like, and for it to be called the psychopath machine is such a perfect description, because honestly what they were doing was seemingly they were looking for these specific characteristics that people would portray, right, as sociopathic and serial killers, and they would essentially, they figured out that yes, they could create psychopaths with MK Ultra techniques, but they also thought it's a lot more easy. Like, it's as far as like it's easier to actually just
Just go find
identify
them.
those characteristics. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then essentially just utilize that to your own benefit after you consistently condition them,
Mm.
and that's effectively what occurred. But they needed test subjects and test groups, so they had, okay, let's what happens when we make a turn a psychopath into a therapist. And then
Whoa.
they had a joint program with Oak Ridge graduates from the MAPS program that Barker was running, where then they would graduate to another program where he would send them to the female institution, the sister institution that was only housed female patients. And the graduates from Barker's Oak Ridge facility were all sociopathic serial killer rapists, were sent to this sister facility and then became
No
therapists,
shit.
patient therapists for the females there who were inevitably raped and yeah, sadistically abused. And it's like,
Wow.
what happens when you turn a psychopath into a therapist? There's an example.
Mm.
and it's disgusting stuff. Like some of the victims explaining what happened to them there, and like it's amazing what, and they were allowing at Oak Ridge, they were allowing the patients to order the drugs that they were then giving them. So sodium pentothal being one of them. Another one was scopolamine. That was the main one, right? Where the devil's breath, right?
Oh,
Where
yeah,
they say
yeah.
scopolamine is like, it's like apparently utilized in this criminal underworld where they very frequently use it because they say that there's a powder form in South America
Like
that
the
they use
zombie
all the
drug.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And basically what they say is, I own you
Mm.
now. For a brief moment in time, you have no inhibitions where, or as far as like, you cannot protect or defend yourself, and you can say, hey, empty your bank account. And if you're on
Yeah.
scopolamine, you just do it, right? Yeah,
This is
no
where it
questions
gets
asked.
so
And
dark and convoluted, and a lot of people check out when they hear things like this. We have occult ritualism, mind control, dark neuroscience applied in these operations, and you put it all together and you're creating assassins, splitting people's personalities, and having these remote abilities to control people. It's absolutely insane, but it's was absolutely happening as well.
absolutely, brother. And that reminds me, there's actually um when I did the James Holmes episode, right? I covered the Dark Knight Cinema shooting, right? The Aurora, Colorado shooting that occurred there, and man, I found this crazy quote from this woman, Lynn Hersha, who co-authored a book with her sister, and it was given the title "Secret Weapons: How Two Sisters Were Brainwashed to Kill for Their Country." And she says, "What angers me is the loss of control. At any moment, someone could come to me, be dressed the right way, use the right code, and I no longer have free will.
Wow.
I will do anything that person requests. I hate them for that. Nothing else is as bad as knowing that I am always out of control, knowing that I am still a laboratory experiment, a puppet whose strings are hidden from everyone but my handlers, and I don't know yet how to break free."
Wow.
Like that alone is, it blew me away when I discovered that, because again, it's like we're talking about modern Manchurian candidates as well. Like this isn't something that has it in my mind. MK Ultra, okay, obviously was driven underground post the church committee hearings, because essentially what had happened there was it was false transparency, and they needed plausible deniability cutouts within the private sector, and so they utilized this brief opportunity to just honestly create, not now there are obviously naturally occurring occult organizations, right, but the state and the intelligence apparatus went out of their way to, out of whole cloth, create certain occult organizations as well to kind of benefit within this structure of plausible deniability. And I think Jonestown is one of the best
Yeah.
examples of an alleged cult, right? Doomsday cult that is clearly just an it's really just an inevitable consequence of MK Ultra going
Yeah.
underground. And that's what I remember. There was a paper that a Berkeley professor sent called The Penal Colony, and he sent it to it was William Holsinger, who is Congressman Leo Ryan's aide. Congressman Leo Ryan was like a radical congressman, man. Like that dude was investigating MK Ultra at such a real level. Like we don't have congressmen like this anymore. It doesn't exist, because this guy was like, he was going undercover as a prisoner in the California prison
Damn.
complex to see how they're treating prisoners at the
Wow.
time. And yeah, so it's like crazy what he was actually doing at that time. But he was also just straight up showing up at Langley and saying, "Show me the files." Like he was one of those guys who was a thorn in the side of the agency at the
Yeah.
time. And essentially, he showed up in Patty Hearst trial, saying, "Hey, MK Ultra, guys. She was entirely mind controlled through the Vacaville prison complex, where, by the way, Charles Manson was at attended that institution in the early
Yeah.
50s, and Patty Hearst got caught up in that pipeline that was set up. So there's a project or a Phoenix Project operative named Colston Westbrook, who, by the way, was affiliated with the Black Site in Guyana, which was originally a CIA clandestine black site to train Angolan rebels,
No shit.
and that was before it inevitably became the People's Temple Agricultural Project in the middle of Guyana. Isn't that
It
insane?
is.
That was Jonestown. So Colston Westbrook, he helped train up Angolan rebels as a Phoenix Project operative in on that very black site that became Jonestown. And then he just so happened to be brought back from his Phoenix Project operation to when Operation Chaos was going. It was basically this hyper operational phase of Chaos itself, which was really just COINTELPRO in a way, but in I think a wider scope. And so it's very interesting because he's brought back to inevitably set up this pipeline while posing as a professor at UC Berkeley. We're talking CIA covert
Mm.
operative posing as a professor at UC Berkeley,
Wow.
setting up a pipeline directly to the Vacaville institution. Oh, did I have a fly on my glass? Anyway, setting up a pipeline to the Vacaville institution where Donald Cinque DeFries was being apparently experimented on using mind control techniques, right? And so he was being essentially gifted the process that Charles Manson was, as far as this strange ability to utilize a mind control kind of patsy cutout that you can essentially hang out to dry at the end of the
Mm.
operation, and that's typically what happens. And I think that that was very much what Donald Cinque DeFries and the role that he played within the Patty Hearst connection, because Colston Westbrook sets this up, and then guess what? Patty Hearst, caught up in the pipeline, is visiting Donald Cinque DeFries long before he would be released or break out of prison, when they had a policy of just letting out you know these assets. They would just let them out and act as if they escaped prison.
Wow.
And this happened multiple times at Vacaville. People are just escaping all the time, winding up in Texas, committing a mass shooting.
Jeez.
And yeah. And so I'm just saying, like, when you realize how involved the California prison system was with implementing sophisticated mind control operations and experiments on, the prisoner victims, is what they really became. But yeah, so you just had straight up CIA operatives posing as prisoner guards and things of that nature, when they're really just using and leveraging the institution for MK Ultra operations. And so Congressman Leo Ryan himself went to Vacaville, right? He was probing that facility as well, attempting to get MK Ultra documents, claiming it was an MK Ultra facility. It's now since been proven to be.
Mm.
And so it's so fascinating because he's probing the Vacaville prison institution, and then he's also being basically, what had happened is that you had concerned relatives. A concerned relatives committee was formed regarding the Jonestown victims, right? And this was before the mass suicide happened, or the
Yeah.
mass death. But yeah, it's very interesting because he was approached by this committee, but it seems as if he was lured down strategically by the CIA to rid themselves of this thorn in their side,
Wow.
who would not stop investigating MK Ultra and right tracking and tracing these institutions that were heavily involved and implicated. And then all of a sudden he gets lured down to Guyana, and he was the priority targeted assassination on Port Cayuma airstrip, right, where he's trying to actually help get some of the victims out of there, and people are passing him a note clandestinely, and saying, help get us out of Jonestown, basically.
Wow.
And then yeah, a mind controlled Manchurian candidate, allegedly, it's what it seems to have been, as far as the perpetrator who who went down with the Red Brigade, the right to Port Cayuma airstrip, which there was an armed security force at Jonestown, and it was called the Red Brigade. And right, and I think Jim Jones might have even had a. There's a lot of evidence that potentially claims that he also was very much experimented on, and even had a Manchurian
Mm.
Code name, which I found very interesting. So it makes sense because from what I'm reading now, there are like a lot of the special forces operatives and just you know mind controlled subjects in the first place. It seems as if but definitely with Delta Force and the Green Berets, like there's a lot of the Green Berets who are allegedly going into special forces were forced to go through some of these sophisticated mind control techniques. And so many of them have been considered to be a part of this group of sleepers who were then programmed with this inevitable goal of what they would pursue and attempt to achieve, let's say. And even I've even seen, like, let's say that I was just researching a more of a footprint involved in like CIA mind control in regard to Waco. And
Mm.
I had no idea that there was a connection there, but there's legitimately a tangible connection to investigating Waco through this alternative theory scope and perspective of a covert black site that had been functional for the intelligence community since post World War II, and that effectively there were six sleepers programmed within David Koresh's inner circle,
Wow.
including David Koresh himself, apparently,
Yeah.
and that is why they were so uh, uh, apparently capable of conditioning and controlling the minds of the Branch Davidians at the time as well. But also, it's this individual named Gunther Russbacher. That's his name. This guy, he claims to have been a covert CIA operative who was a part of the October surprise scandal with which exposed Iran Contra, and George Bush Sr. was a part. William Casey was involved for the CIA. It's just fascinating stuff. But he claims that he was the pilot who flew George Bush Sr. back, well, first to and then back from the visit and meeting in Paris for the hostage
Mm.
crisis, to make sure that the hostages, that they extended until after the election, right? So they could essentially get him in office, right? Effectively was the entire goal. But still, so he comes back. Members of his clandestine operational team are essentially blowing the whistle, and then people are dying right and left because this October surprise task force is now vetting and investigating what actually occurred with the hostage crisis. And so this guy named Paul Wiltshire, right? He inevitably becomes an attorney for these CIA operatives, right? But of course, he there's a very strange death that occurs in regard to this as well. And Paul Wiltshire is the one who dies just after presenting all the evidence to the October surprise task force, which is just insane to me. But again, it what he was claiming was that, yeah, David Koresh he had a CIA
Mm.
background, and that the LMI is where I forget the name of the actual it's a very interesting institution that definitely has ties, which I was unaware of until recently, but definitely has ties when it comes down to it, to mind
Yeah.
control, right? And the MK Ultra operation, and this is what it was called, the Leadership Management
Mm.
Institute, right? And basically the claim is that David Koresh had an extensive CIA background and was a sleeper who had been subjected to extensive CIA mind control training and programming, and that Waco was a major center for such CIA mind control experimentation and programming,
Wow.
with much of this activity occurring at the CIA's Leadership Management Institute, the LMI in Waco. And then he also names Salt Lake City, Utah, Provo, Utah, Logan, Utah, Boise, Idaho, and San Francisco as primary locations for this covert operation as well. And that includes, so it kind of like implicates the Ted Bundy case as well in many ways, which is very interesting.
Interesting.
And so, and and they go on to claim that basically that is the other those are the other locations of the CIA sponsored cults. But what is implicated is the Delta Force, right? And because the Delta Force had been present at Waco on the last day, the fiery siege, right? And it was basically an intelligence sharing operation that inevitably took place. You had a lot of different footprints of foreign intelligence being apparently present as well. But yeah, so they were present during the final assault, but apparently they sent in operatives to kill Koresh and the 6 other sleepers within the Davidians before setting the fires that burned down Mount Carmel. And they had apparently been given a specific drug that wouldn't allow the because what they said was basically there was a I'm trying to remember the exact term now because there's a specific poison that they had administered into the Branch Davidian complex where it was a nerve gas, a nerve toxin, a nerve agent. And so effectively what had happened is that none of the Branch Davidians would be able to flee because not only was there this CS gas, which would be very flammable, but they had a combination of CS gas and this nerve toxin that would then apparently cause all the Davidians to not be able to. They would become paralyzed
Wow.
effectively.
That's
And
crazy.
so they said that they gave a specific pharmaceutical agent to the CIA operatives within the Delta Force who were sent to go in and actually shoot David Koresh point blank. And by the way, they said both Koresh and the right hand man, um, although the inevitable claim is that they committed suicide, they said that no, it actually from the way the gunshot was administered, it clearly proves that it was not, at least it was not in line with a typical suicide, right? As far as that was how it was explained. And then another fact of the matter is that the CS gas that they used would then burn so hot that all the evidence would essentially be disintegrated. And then they also claimed that they came in and took the front door and put it in a U-Haul before anybody could do anything about it because they wanted to make sure that obviously the front door would have unequivocally proven who fired first. And the feds still to this day claim they didn't shoot
You
first,
said
but
the
we know
agents
they did.
that were part of the siege were given drugs as well?
Yeah, they said basically that there were CIA operatives who had infiltrated the Delta Force team that was sent to on the final day of the siege when the assault happened. Well, at least the final assault took place, and that when right before the fires broke out, right, they said that essentially this Gunther Russbacher, covert clandestine CIA operative with a Navy SEAL team, basically that he's worked alongside, and yeah, they're claiming that, and apparently many other deaths occurred after this happened, as far as within the special forces unit. Same thing with Jonestown, where inevitably all these Green Berets died, who were sent to Jonestown to, and by the way, Colonel Bo Gritz, Green Beret commander, sent to Ruby Ridge to negotiate with Randy Weaver because Randy Weaver was a Green Beret, right? Who knew Bo Gritz? Bo Gritz says that he was told that Jonestown was just a cleanup, right, from MK Ultra, basically, and that they utilized the reason that the body count just consistently kept rising was not because the Guyanese medical experts couldn't count, like the official narrative
Yeah.
became, but was because they were actually tying off loose ends from all these other MK Ultra
Yeah.
victims. Who he even mentioned, he said that the Montreal experiments, he was saying they just took them from Canada and threw them into the jungle in Guyana and just executed them. And the same thing he said was that he was told by, and specifically a Green Beret came out and blew the whistle, but remained anonymous. He used a different name that only his operatives, co-operatives would actually have understood him
Mm.
by. And he claimed that he was a part of the team who flew in on the helicopters to allegedly, what they claim to save the remaining victims. But in reality, he claims that their orders were to shoot on sight, and that he specifically said that they shot the remaining survivors before even landing the helicopter from the helicopter. Yeah. So
That's crazy.
when they already had the body bags waiting in Georgetown, they had same thing happened in Waco. Apparently, the federal authorities had been tipped off. The body bags were ready, man. They knew that everyone was going to die, right? And so it's just like you don't have that prior knowledge otherwise. And there was I forget it. It was the what's his name? Damn it, the CIA operative who was supposed to be who was being represented in Oliver Stone's film JFK, with that famous scene, Mr. X, right, where he's explaining how the actual triangulated fire took place and JFK was assassinated, and all the indicators proving that this was a CIA operation. And he came out and he said, yeah, the body bags, the medical facility that's state of the art, well, far beyond anything else that was on Jonestown site. It clearly had been there long before the People's Temple was formed at that place. But he says, obviously, that the key indicator proving that there's a CIA footprint, and very clearly a hidden hand involved, was the fact that, yeah, they were tipped off. They had perfectly orchestrated this. Why was British Black Watch troops? Why were they hanging out in that area, running covert operations? It makes no sense. It's like they were perfectly ready to pounce. And it seems as if, like, any of the stragglers who were attempting to flee into the jungle were just executed on spot.
That's
Yeah.
absolutely
So
crazy, man. The history of these
crazy stuff.
operations are disturbing enough, but if we look at how it's being implemented now, I wonder if much of what we experienced in the past was beta testing for something much larger, a bigger control system. We can see the effect of pharmaceuticals and our social media content on the younger people, as well as, like you were saying, the mental state of a lot of these people that are involved in mass shootings and things of that nature. There's often pharmaceuticals involved, along with a bit of a nudge from some clandestine group or member of a group that they're talking with online. There's always evidence of that. But even more disturbing is what they could have been implementing now. We look at the events of the past, and there was assassinations, bloodshed, these very clandestine, bloody operations. But now we have still that going on, but there's also this huge level of theater to where they don't necessarily have to carry out these violent acts or these really high impact events. They can have actors portray that something happened. And this is something that's mixed in with everything. And I'm not saying that all the high impact events we experience in our modern age are theater, but I believe there's a level of theater involved. And I wanted to get your thoughts on what the bigger picture is for the direction everything is headed. These operations seem to be stepping stones, like I said, for something larger. And my biggest fear right now is that they are going to implement some sort of AI-based governance or law enforcement to control everything. What do you think?
Oh yeah, dystopian path to Minority Report.
Yeah.
Essentially this pre-crime situation that we find ourselves in, with the newly embraced, what was it, $500 billion AI infrastructure, I think it was, that Larry Ellison and these various individuals are perfectly involved in at the very least, kind of laying the groundwork. But far more than that, we're definitely witnessing the pivot into what I see as the totalitarian technocratic state. I mean, that's what it feels like, and it seems as if you see the rise of the stable coins, which is effectively just the privatized version of the CBDC, which is an end around, in my way, in my mind, to circumvent Like I clearly and honestly, I was reading about how the blockchain was inherently compromised from day one as well. So it's like, at a certain point, can we actually pursue some sort of decentralized financial currency? Is that possible? Because it doesn't seem like it is anymore, and it's effectively not becoming, or it's becoming to where it will not be in the future. And when the vision, the dystopian vision is always to eliminate property rights, right? That's stage, at least one of the stages that they're hoping to achieve at a certain point. But either way, we're talking about natural asset corridors. Like Agenda 2030 was real. Agenda 21 was real. Operation Lockstep is real. You know what I mean? The Great Reset, it's happening. So it's like, I don't care that Klaus Schwab's not the number one head of the World Economic Forum any longer, but he clearly has a diabolical influence, knowing who his mentor was, Henry Kissinger, and right, and all that we do know is that there is an international structure that is very much in place, and I think that it's been I think that the facilitation of this structure for this new world government, which I do believe in those terms. I know people don't like to utilize new world order and things of that nature, but I'm sorry to tell you, they coined the term. So when they're the ones who are actually embracing it and telling us what their vision is, and who am I to reject the terms that they're utilizing to describe that very vision? And so what I see is that you mentioned, you know, just essentially not being able to trust your own eyes at this point when it comes to some of these false flags and manufactured crises and things of that nature. It's the mind war and the psychology of victory. And we are in this place where we have to understand fourth and fifth generational warfare, asymmetric warfare, right? How this all plays in to the gradual tiptoe toward totalitarianism, which is if COVID didn't prove anything, if it proved anything, I should say, it proved that there's a diabolical, tyrant within within the vast majority of the average person, and they're just waiting and willing for you to trigger that Manchurian within them that has to control their neighbor, and they just cannot imagine a world where they don't have a say in your philosophical outlook on life. And it's like, my God, imagine feeling like that is your role on the world stage instead of just to defend and protect your own family and pursue principles worthwhile. It's like, the only way. But anyway, I you already know, I view the collectivist nature as a poison pill. I think it's a trap that's been very well laid, and each and every one of us seem to fall perfectly into that trap so very often. It's like we have to reject our prior programming or something. It's really what it feels like. And I think through the structure of the current education system and every facet of life, Yuri Bezmenov's ideological subversion, if he took your fat ass back to the Soviet Union and showed you the concentration camp himself, right, you still wouldn't change your mind. And it's like that is just like, when it's not a black pill to address the root causes of some of you, right? And I think that, again, the pivot away from the black pill is the individual sovereignty.
Yeah.
The life worth living, the family dynamic that is crucial to just engaging in this life while we're here.
This show definitely focuses on the more deeper aspects of everything. I like to look at the spiritual side of things, and I'd love to get your thoughts on how much these groups are truly involved and believe in these occult practices that they appear to be involved with, but there's many different schools of thoughts. Many think that that's just another layer of theater to gain control, that they are really more atheistic in nature and it's all about power and control and nothing more. And there are others that think it's something much deeper and there are spiritual intelligences involved and very deeply rooted occult practices that they claim to bring power to these groups. I'd love to get your thoughts on what's really happening there.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely like all you take it all the way back to the 18th century hellfire clubs, and and these this elite strata of the bureaucratic oligarchs. Human compromise has been a reality for far too long, and so has the corruption of the mind and the psyche, the deliberate deception, but so has sexual abuse as well, and but also sex magic, blood rituals. These are real things, and people legitimately believe in the harnessing of the power that it provides, and that even even that like in the terms of the Son of Sam case with David Berkowitz and the Ultimate Evil, right? Maury Terry's book on that case, and he kind of perfectly provides like this window into the reality that yeah, there is a level where I think the intelligence community does utilize it to their own benefit to create this dynamic of um like very easily dismissible by the average person looking at it at face
Mm,
value, right? Like if you're introduced to those ideas, you instantly kind of turn a blind eye to it, like, yeah, sure, that's
yeah.
extraordinary. And so there is a level I think that's leveraged against us and exploited, but I know that people believe this and practice this on a real level. um, but I also do understand that it's an enterprise, and that's something that is terrifying, and something I never wanted to admit, but there is a larger enterprise at work here. And when you consider what is most lucrative, yeah, it gets into a very dark place where it's not only human trafficking, it's not only child pornography, it's snuff
Mm,
films, right? It's ritual blood sacrifice on
mm,
camera, and like then sold in a pedophile publication and magazine subscription style based, like the Hermes, the Delta Project advertising in the Hermes publication, which was the pedophile underground that connects John David Norman, who's running this malignant, cancerous group that clearly is disrupting the moral framework of society itself. But worse than that, they're using the same organization not only to traffic children and other human beings for various reasons, organ harvesting being one of them as well.
mm.
But the fact of the matter is, you have groups and organizations like, the Process Church of the Final Judgment, right, which I believe is a great example of yes, I think that there's an intelligence footprint diabolically connecting the organization to much of this sadistic underworld, but there is a true belief system in place that is definitely practiced within the framework of the occultism. Yes, it's a lot of Kabbalistic magic and Crowleyisms that are involved as far as like, the proclamation of essentially facilitating the age of Aquarius, and the Aeon of
Mhm.
Horus, right? These strange ancient occult references that become undeniable in terms of the certain symbolic nature of a lot of how it plays out. And also, if you keep in mind the fact that even with David Berkowitz on some of the Son of Sam killings, who he claims obviously he was involved with most of them, if not all of them, but he only was actually a part of the killings in, I think it was three,
Mm.
and essentially he didn't even pull the trigger. Right? It was other individuals involved in the organization, the local chapter of the Process Church called the Divine 22 Disciples of Hell, and yeah, and he claims that they were committing blood ritual sacrifice in Untermeyer Park, where Detective James Rothstein, who was put in charge of this, investigating a lot of this, he had a criminal informant tip him off to these mass graves of Alsatian German Shepherd dogs in Untermeyer Park. which that is very much, you look at how the Nazis would actually the loyalty tests that were involved with they would basically within the SS, they would give you a German Alsatian German Shepherd, right? And as a puppy, and have you raise the puppy, and then once you get to a certain stage you have to kill this dog.
Hmm.
And it's a loyalty test essentially, but it's also a way to kind of traumatize you, and it's definitely trauma based mind control in many ways. And so I think understanding that, but also realizing that there is like a legitimate, if you talk about, they were a lot of the Son of Sam killings, they were staged on occult holidays, right? So, and also outside of, there's a specific nightclub that one of the murders took place out in front of, and that the name of the nightclub was a cult, inherently a cult, right? And had occult connotations to it that were directly tied. I'm trying to remember the name of the club, because it's ridiculous and it's undeniable that it has those connections. But that was something I found fascinating, because essentially David Berkowitz himself said that there was filming going on, right? As far as for snuff material sitting outside of where, basically, during the killing of Stacy Moskowitz, apparently it was filmed by someone who was hiding in a van, which was stationed right outside of where the killing was going to take place. And so then, he's inevitably asked by Maury Terry at one point, he's asked about essentially this cult group that he claims that he was a part of. And he says Berkowitz stated that the coven he belonged to, named the Children, was infiltrated by an elite group that pushed them further into the dark side of what they were doing in Untermyer, where they were meeting in the Devil's Cave, this underground structure, which has now been filled in. And you look at the evidence of that place: upside down crosses, pentagrams on the walls, and this was where they were committing a lot of these blood sacrifice, like animal sacrifice was happening a lot in Untermyer, but kids were going missing
Yeah.
too, right? And so that's what began to happen, and there were biker gangs involved in running security for their
Wow.
rituals. And I didn't know this, but this happened in the Atlanta child murders as well, with allegedly Wayne Williams,
Yeah.
right? He's responsible for killing all those children, acted alone.
Well,
No,
this is another
absolutely
layer to
not.
this. If you look at the work of David McGowan and others, the era of serial killers, 70s, 80s, there seemed to be this disproportionate number of serial killers that just started appearing out of nowhere. And the deeper you look into it, they have military involvement, possibly been some sort of mind control agents.
Dude, John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy straight up had like multiple personality disorder. Wayne Williams said he was trained on a CIA black site when he was 17 years old, and it connects to Mitch Warbell, right? This guy who's like involved in every scandal you could ever imagine, this insane covert operative. And this Wayne Williams says that he was involved as far as being trained up on this black site um outside of Atlanta, I believe is where it was. But I know that when you look into Wayne Williams' involvement there, yeah, he was actually recruiting children for pedophiles within a larger network, and apparently his father had connections to the this youth organization, and had political connections as well, and so did Wayne Williams, who effectively there was a congressman or a senator, I believe, who he knew two senators who he was very close with, and one of them told him that if he ever got caught, he would provide him with a specific attorney, who actually then later on that attorney represented, I believe, Michael Thievis, who was a child pornography kingpin out of Atlanta. And so when you come to find out that Wayne Williams was procuring children using this interesting recruiting tactic where he claims he's like a talent spotter as a musical promoter, and he can make your child a
Mm.
star, right? And so I forget the name of the group that he utilized. It was a gross name. It reminded me of again, it wasn't like disgusting. It was more like a cult in nature, but I forget the name of it. it was almost as if like, not, but you know how like the Delphi murders. I think that just the Delphi itself was a strategic location that was chosen due to the Oracle at
Yeah, yeah.
Delphi and the various occult connotations there. So that's what I think, uh, you know, is the reason that he named this group. That he was really just taking these young children he claimed were musically talented to this strange recording studio called Apogee, I think, and that was apparently owned by the national pornography kingpin Michael Davis. And so he's a front man for the organized crime syndicate, right? These various mob figures, which again, this provides a perfect reference point for exactly what was happening with John Wayne Gacy, right? I think as well, because John Wayne Gacy was tied in directly to the Odyssey Foundation, which the Odyssey Foundation was ran and organized by this convicted pedophile by the name of John David Norman. And John David Norman is man, you look at the Delta Project, which is just the secondary name for the Odyssey Foundation after John David Norman went to prison. He just created another cutout. It's the same network, but he called it the Delta Project, and that was the one that was advertising in the Hermes publication network, which was just a pedophile magazine for that was covert and a pedophile underground magazine. Yeah, where it's subscription model based,
Jesus.
where basically based on the tier that you were paying on the subscription model, they would provide you with the sexual proclivity that you desired, which one of the highest rungs on that tier happened to be human hunting parties at North Fox
Jeez.
Island, which is
Yeah.
real. And Francis Sheldon is a real perpetrator who inevitably escaped and went to, I believe, oh shit, what is the name of, I always forget. But yeah, anyway, it
Hmm.
doesn't matter. The point being is that yeah, he inevitably escaped to this area of the world that has very lax age of consent laws, and also is extremely apparently, even if you're underage and you claim that you were sexually abused, your parent has to go forward and actually pursue charges, and yeah, no one will actually listen or take you seriously otherwise. And so apparently that is just how it's structured, and it's very difficult to prosecute these child abuse cases apparently. And so anyway, Francis Sheldon, he got out of town and ended up all over the world with pictures of him at child care organizations and youth care organizations with children on his lap.
Hmm.
Yeah, and he had a private plane. It was very much like Epstein before Epstein in many ways. And this guy's never even. I mean, he died
Yeah.
free. You know what I mean?
As
Like,
is the case
yeah,
for too many of these monsters. Now, we got a few minutes left. There is so much unfolding right now that we need to pay attention to and navigate. How do you navigate through everything? And what would you tell people who are just waking up to this and believe that the system's too big to fail? There's no hope. There's no way out of it. We're all doomed. I don't believe that. I do have hope. I think it
right.
relies in our individual lives and what we are individually bringing to the table. But what do you think?
Yeah, I would entirely agree with that, man. I think that for a time, there was a brief moment where I felt a little black pilled. You know what I mean? And but I just I knew at a real core level, principally, that it's the wrong outlook and the wrong perspective to embrace and live your life by. And also, I think that once you do catch a glimpse at the overall scope of this monstrosity, right, disrupting any sort of real, just optimistic path toward a global civilization that is worthwhile, in my mind, it's still there's beauty everywhere. And that is something that I think we need to understand and acknowledge on a daily basis. And I think the ultimate goal here is to understand that, yes, psychopaths rule the world at this moment. It is probably a dark reality that we should at the very least acknowledge and stop worshiping false prophets who are, of course, running misdirection in terms of the true power paradigm and trying to kind of dissuade us from acknowledging the root cause. And I think that all we can hope to do that will lead us into an optimistic future is to address that very root cause, is to be honest and reflect on what we got wrong, be open-minded and objective enough to not be confined to an ideological camp where you're imprisoned by this ideology and unable to actually see things outside of those terms in regard to the overall picture of global society and where we are headed. And I think that I understand why we've been conditioned to kind of not ask the questions, right, that are very much the questions worth asking. And it's because they want us consistently arguing over things that don't matter. And so where do we find ourselves? Unable to agree upon the fundamental basic facts of life. How are we even going to move forward in any sort of productive way and come to some sort of terms where we can have some proactive and optimistic conclusion, where we can at the very least put ourselves back on a path that could inevitably result in more, let's just say, it's always the goal is individual sovereignty, but for me personally, I just think that really what we should be focusing and prioritizing is psychologically rejecting, right, the deception, right, the very much systematic deception playing out to get us to embrace, the power paradigm as is currently structured, which in my mind is a deception in itself, because obviously all we see are political puppets dancing around, providing cover for the true agenda playing out and acting as if they aren't ultimately on the same side, inevitably, pushing us down the same dystopian path. And so, for me personally, I think what we should always focus on is what we can control. And so, again, it's like, I very much appreciate the serenity prayer, right? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And all that I hope for on a daily basis, and it's become my mantra. It's I pray for my heart to be in the right place, my intentions to be pure, and my mind to work efficient and effectively as as often as possible, because it very much doesn't happen occasionally. And I'll find myself just reeling. I have a schizophrenic nature where I just one thing leads to the other, and it's just like I can't help myself.
Yeah.
But still, life is good, man. And if you surround yourself with people worthwhile and you pursue something that you're passionate about, I think that as well, because you find so many people, they're in a they're in this identity crisis. They're in the midst of an identity crisis, and that makes them very dangerous and vulnerable at the same time. And I think when you're running that risk, remaining psychologically vulnerable at that level, um, these bad ideas can take root. They can disrupt your life. They can cause real consequences. And man, nothing's worth that when it comes to disrupting your own family dynamic and things of that nature. As I mentioned early in the show, like, we always need to be willing to set these things aside for the people we love, as far as that is concerned, in terms of political, debates and arguments, that we have to remember and remind ourselves again what matters most, right? And I think that that is something that we should always readdress and center ourselves as often as we can. Um, and yeah, as long as that is kind of your perspective and framework and outlook on life, you'll typically find yourself in the right place in regard to, yeah, make a conscious effort to manufacture some defense mechanism psychologically for yourself and your own family, so you can hopefully protect them and defend against what is out there in a realistic way. But other than that, yeah, just make sure, control what you can control, and pursue a life worth living. You know what I mean? Like, that's all we can do, honestly. And all this information, I think, is just at least granted me the ability to know what is out there, to be aware of, and know what to protect my family against. That's another thing, and that's ultimately all I'm concerned with at this point. I want to protect what I can, people I love, hopefully push them in the right directions, and beyond that, it is what it is.
Right on,
you know
man.
what I mean? Like, that's what.
Well, hey, that is a great note to end on, and there's much more we could discuss. Definitely going to have you back on in the future. One more time before we close out, let the audience know where they can find your work.
Awesome, man. And man, thank you again for having me on, brother. And I apologize once more for just the scheduling conflicts that I had playing out, but yeah, it never has happened at that level, though. So I am sorry, but beyond that, I feel very grateful that you gave me this opportunity and provided me with the platform to have this conversation, which I just think these conversations are what makes my life worth living. I love this, and I think, yeah, man, anytime we're working through these ideas in a way that seems like, you know, it's a conversation that is constructive, right? It's like, man, that's all I want. I want to be able to pursue these objective, constructive conversations with people who are worthwhile, and you're one of those people, man. So thank you,
brother.
And everybody, of course, man. But everyone can find me at the Underclass Podcast, and support me at the Patreon if anything I've ever said resonates with you. And other than that, man, thank you again.
Awesome. We'll have links right in the description. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. See you then.